I'm Faye. Today's story is a small, everyday interaction inspired by a real life post shared on Reddit. I think it actually says a lot about a pretty widespread assumption people have that owning a cute animal in public somehow means you have forfeited your right to control who touches it. And I think once you really sit with the logic being used against our narrator here, it falls apart pretty fast. Here's the setup. A sweet, cuddly dog has one quick. He pees when overly excited, which makes strangers petting him risky. At a patio restaurant, a woman and her kids walk up and start petting him without asking. Our narrator politely asks her to stop. She insists he's harmless and keep letting her kids petting him. Our narrator explains it's not about harm. He gets overexcited and has accidents. She mutters, annoyed, and walk off glaring. Right on cue, the dog leaves the exact puddle our narrator was trying to prevent. Then the next table chimes in, saying our narrator was wrong. She never should have had to stop. He disagrees. She never asked, and it's his call. So, AITA for not letting a stranger touch his own dog in public after directly explaining why? I think this story is a really good example of how he's harmless and gets treated like it settles the whole question when it's actually answering a completely different question than one that was actually raised. All right, let's step into the details and unpack this together, looking after the exact words left behind our narrator. I have a small dog that, when very excited, he tends to pee like everywhere. He's a very sweet and cuddly little dog, but taking him in public can be problematic because many people want to pet him because he's really is a super cute. Okay, I want to establish this clearly right away because it's easy to miss just how specific legitimate this concern is. This isn't somebody being generally overprotective or paranoid about their dog. This is very specific, predictable physical reaction. Excitement leads to peeing, and being cute in public leads directly to more strangers trying to generate exactly that excitement. That's a genuinely reasonable thing to want to manage. It's not about the dog being aggressive or dangerous or even unfriendly. It's a purely practical concern about a bodily function that gets triggered by a completely predictable stimulus. Lots of unfamiliar hands and attention all at once from strangers he doesn't know. Let's follow the story forward. Anyways, at patio restaurant, a woman and her children really wanted to pet my dog, and they approached without asking and started to pet my dog. Okay, I want to slow down on this detail specifically because I think it gets glossed over really quickly in these kinds of stories, and it shouldn't be. She didn't ask first. She just walked up and started touching someone else's animal. And I think it's worth pointing out how strange that would sound if you swapped the dog for basically anything else somebody owns. Nobody thinks it's normal to walk up and start touching a stranger's bag or their kid or their bike without asking first. Dogs get treated as this weird exception in public spaces where a lot of people seem to feel entitled to physically contact just because the animal is visible and appealing. But it's still somebody else's pet with its own needs, quirks, and boundaries, and the baseline expectation should really be asking first every time, not assuming access by default. Let's advance to the next lines. I noticed immediately, of course, and asked her nicely to stop petting him. And she asked why, and that he was harmless, and continued to let her children pet my dog. I explained that yes, he was harmless, but I Didn't want her petting my dog because he gets really excited around strangers and tends to pee. Okay, this exchange is actually really important because it shows that women generally wasn't listening to the actual concern being raised. He's harmless, answer a question nobody asked. Our narrator never said the dog was dangerous or aggressive or might bite. He raised a completely different issue over excitement leading to an accident. And she just kept responding to a concern that was never actually on the table. And notice, even after he clarified this directly, specifically in plain language, she kept letting her kids continue anyway. That's not a misunderstanding anymore at that point. That's ignoring a clearly stated reason because it's inconvenient to the thing she wanted to do, which was let her kids keep petting a cute dog. Let's look at the next part. She called me an expletive word under her breath and proceeded to get mad at me because she had to tell her children that they couldn't pet my dog anymore. She walked away, glaring at me, and my dog had, of course, left behind a puddle of pee. Okay, and I actually think this ending is kind of the perfect, almost poetic confirmation of exactly what our narrator was trying to prevent the entire time. The concern wasn't hypothetical or made up to be difficult. It played out in real time right after she ignored the warning. That's not bad luck. That's the predictable, described outcome of the exact behavior she was asked to stop. And her getting upset that she had to explain to her own kids why they couldn't keep petting the dog. That's that's frustration over a consequence of her own choice to ignore a clearly stated boundary. Not something our narrator did to her. He gave her information she needed to avoid this exact outcome, and she chose to disregard it anyway. Let's continue down the timeline. The table next to me said that I was in the wrong and it wasn't a big deal to let her pet my dog, and that I shouldn't bring him to a public place if I don't expect him getting pet. I said that I disagree specifically because she didn't ask, and I am the pet owner and have the right to say what goes. So, AITA here? Okay, I really want to push back on this bystander take specifically because don't bring your dog in public if you don't want him pet. Completely misunderstands what public space actually means. Being in public means other people can get to exist near your dog, look at him, maybe compliment him. It doesn't mean strangers get automatic hands on access to him without asking, regardless of what the owner says. And our narrator response here is genuinely correct. Being owner does mean he gets to decide who touches his own dog and how. That's not an unusual entitled position. That's just how pet ownership works in any context. The fact that the dog is cute or that being asked to stop is mildly inconvenient for somebody else's afternoon plans doesn't change who actually has the authority to make the call. So here's where I land on this one. NTA. And honestly, this isn't close at all. He gave a clear, specific, completely reasonable explanation for he want his dog pat. And that explanation was ignored, not because it was unreasonable, but because it was inconvenient for somebody who wanted her kids to keep petting a cute dog, regardless of what its owner actually said. The bystanders comment, you shouldn't bring your dog out in public if you don't want him touched, really deserve to be called out clearly because it flips ownership and consent completely backward. Being in public space doesn't waive your right to control access to your own pet anymore that it waives your right to control access to anything else you own. Anything The story is a pretty good reminder that he's harmless and you should be allowed to touch him. Are two completely different claims, and only one of them was never actually in question here. Now, I want to hear from you. Do you think there is a reasonable expectation in public that people should just get to pet a friendly looking dog? Or do you think asking first should always be the default? No matter how cute or approachable the dog seems, drop your verdict below, NTA or YTA. And if you have ever had a stranger ignore a clear boundary you set about a pet or anything else, tell me about it in the comments. If you are into these breakdowns, go ahead and subscribe because I do this every week. Real situations, real psychology, no yelling, just common sense. See you in the next one.
If you found this video valuable and learned something new, do us a favor, like subscribe to TinyButWise and share it with your loved ones.